Being in a grunt company or battalion, there was a lot of odd stuff that happened. Walked out one day, I was on duty, and there were guys on the roof with a hose, and they were all shotgunning beers out of out of the hose.
Being a combat engineer unit, we built upgraded roads and built some new sections of road. We built fire support bases and night defensive positions. We either built them new or went in and repaired, rebuilt ones that had been built years before and abandoned. But and then during those times, it's kind of not a joke, but there's talk about how combat engineers, worked with a shovel in one hand and a weapon in the other hand.
I started out on an A-team out in the middle of the jungle with a 12-man team, and I was a radio operator. And after I'd been there 3 months, it was starting the mobile guerrilla force. So they called me in to be one of the mobile guerrilla force. So I was on that for 6 months. And we were the people that went out to the camps that got in trouble, reinforced them, helped them out, pulled them out. We had whatever we had to do to save them. And then we also patrolled around some of the camps that had too many enemy and they couldn't defend themselves and patrol. And then I went back to an A camp at Camp Geobuck, and these are all in I Corps. And in the second year I was over there, I was in Maxall Recon. And we did recon. It was classified then, but I guess it's not now, out of country recon mostly. That's about it.
So the way that we operated, we did it was like a 30-day cycle. So you would do 10 days of being the patrol platoon, 10 days of being the cop maintenance. So you'd basically be building up the defenses on base. And then you would do 10 days of guard duty. And these were just, everything was very set scheduled. When you were on base maintenance, though, you would also be working as a quick reaction force. So if the other platoon was out and they got in a firefight and they needed some support, they needed ammo, they needed water, they needed food, you would drop what you were doing, you'd put on your gear, and you'd go out to support them in any way that you could. So during patrol, I'd go out and I'd be a spotter. During base maintenance, I was one of the 3 guys that was qualified to operate the Bobcat, which we used to fill a HESCO barrier, which is ultimately a huge sandbag. Mm-hmm. And so I would use the Bobcat, which is just like a little bucket loader, and I'd fill those things with dirt. And because I was one of 3 guys, I had a pretty sweet gig, but we would, when it snowed, we'd have to keep our airfield clean of snow so that helicopters come and land. So we would be operating that thing 24 hours a day around the clock. So it'd be, I'd be out there at 3 o'clock in the morning during a snowstorm, just clearing the snow off the airfield. That was never fun. And then your guard cycles, we would do usually it'd either be 2 4-hour or 2 6-hour shifts, one at night, one at day. And the rest of the time that you had was more your free time where you could sleep, clean your weapon, eat chow, go to the MWR, get on Facebook, email home, whatever. So those were kind of how our days were broken up. Day guard, it was just one person in the guard tower, whereas night guard, they put 2 up there to kind of make sure that often, you get put with a Czech soldier and they didn't speak English and you don't speak Czech. So you try to find something in common that you could get along with. And I remember one guy, I don't remember his name, but he would just sit up there this whole shift and he would just hand roll his own cigarettes. And he'd roll 50 to 100 cigarettes, in no time at all. And I remember just watching this guy and just kind of in amazement at how quick he could do this. But
Afghanistan was a whole different world. It was a combat zone, obviously, and you were working with a very foreign culture. The Afghan culture is different than any other culture in the world. Every valley is different, and every valley has its own tribe. So what you may know in this valley is totally different from what you'll see in the next valley over. And they really don't function as a country. They function more as tribal leaders, and they have they believe in group governance with shuras. So when we were over there, the Taliban had been kicked out, and our job was to make sure the Taliban stayed out, which is a never-ending battle. So during the day, we'd have peace. At night, the Taliban would move in, so we were trying to stop that. So the experiences and memories I have is learning the Afghan culture, eating the Afghan food, training with the Afghan troops, living with the Afghan leadership, the same camps, and then traveling all over southern Afghanistan, which is very different than northern Afghanistan. It's all desert down there. Mm-hmm. And just seeing how brave these Afghan soldiers are and how different they value life versus how we value it. They don't think about tomorrow, they only think about today, because that's their culture. If you think there's going to be a tomorrow, you're not being humble.
The literacy rate in Afghanistan is about 2/3 to 3/4 literate, getting better all the time. In order to be an officer, you must be literate. They want their NCOs to be literate, but they're not all. One of the interesting things that I learned when I was there was that if you see someone with a pen in their pocket, that means that they're literate, that they can read and write, and they're proud of it. They're showing off the fact that they can read and write. There are many aspects of Afghan society that are very different than American society. There's a term that I think comes from India that's called bakshish, and that means a bribe. And so if you were in the Army band and you had a problem and you couldn't resolve it, probably the best way to resolve it would be to slip somebody some money, and then you would get it taken care of. One of the things that I supervised on a monthly basis was the pay activities. Everybody got paid. In their society at that time, they had not begun the process of converting over to electronic funds. So the idea of a debit card or a credit card, no. If it wasn't cash money, it didn't exist. When they got paid, and their currency is called Afghani. So if somebody says they're Afghani, that's not correct. That's their money. They are Afghans. Their money is Afghan. Anyway, they got paid in 10 Afghani increments, like our coins would be 5 cents, 10 cents, so forth. And their units of currency were in 5 Afghani. Well, somebody would show up for pay, and they'd show their ID. Yes, that was them. And then their pay was 135 Afghani. Well, the unit was only either 130 or 140. So they'd get their pay, and then they would leave that 5 Afghani on the table. And I'd say, "What are you doing? What's that? That's your money." "Oh, no, that is for the paymaster. He is a very good man. He's a good guy. We're going to give him that." And I'd say, no, that's your money. You should take it. Well, their idea was that was insurance. That 5 Afghani went in the pocket of the paymaster to make sure that if there was some reason that they weren't there, or their money got hung up, or for whatever reason, if they treated him with that little extra bump, he'd be sure that they were taken care of the next time. And if they didn't do that, who knows? Maybe their paycheck could get lost. Maybe something else would happen. So that whole idea of bakshish is foreign to me. Another thing that was very interesting was that the only time that I really knew what somebody's rank was when they had their ID card out, because they were in the practice of wearing whatever rank they wanted. There would be guys that I thought were sergeants, and they were actually privates, but they could just buy whatever rank. Now, is that legal? No, but nobody cared.
It might interest you to know that at 14 years of age, Pearl Harbor occurred in my life. I joined the Missouri National Guard to serve. When I moved to Kansas because of my father's occupation, I had to be discharged. I was not only underage because I was only 14, but I also left the state, which ended my enlistment in the Missouri National Guard. When I went to Germany on that first assignment, I was assigned to the 2nd Missile Battalion, 86th Artillery. That is a corporal missile, intermediate range missile unit. This was before the 2-man rule as relates to nuclear components. I had custody of 13 nuclear warheads, personal custody of 13 nuclear warheads.
So what was it like to have that responsibility?
Every time I went in the vault where I stored them, I developed a headache and my nose ran. Because it was an awesome amount of power to be able. Mm-hmm. The smallest one of those nuclear warheads was larger than either Nagasaki or Hiroshima.
One morning I got ready to go down the road on a minesweep, and I had learned that if nobody was walking on that road, and there was no kind of traffic at all, then I knew there were some mines out there, because the natives knew, and they weren't going to walk on. And this road was bare, and sometimes they'd be walking on one side or the other, or walking the ditch, but there was nobody out there. And so I started with my detector. I started looking for mines. That particular day, I found 3 different ones and dug them up and detonated them. And when I was digging up the third one, I noticed this older gentleman, native, had his oxen pulling his cart, and it was stacked full of twigs and branches. That was his produce. He would take that to the village where they would bake bread, and that's what they'd use for the fire for their ovens, was those twigs and branches and stuff. So he was going to take that to market, get his money, and be able to provide for his family. Well, when I dug up that third mine, he gave me a thumbs up, or a signal, and a big smile on his face. And that basically, I still swept the road, but that basically told me that was the last one. But that guy was appreciative, showing his appreciation of my finding that, so he had access to get his job done and take care of his family.
And as a Mike Force, we had to, like I said, reinforce, and we went on search and destroy missions also. And when I got my Purple Heart, one of them was outside of Quezon, just not too far below Ashow. And the Marine Corps commander, the I Corps commander was a Marine general, and his name was General Wolf. He's from Kansas. And he called us in, and my partner that worked with me said he had information that there was a battalion of North Vietnamese in this area, up by Quezon. And he wanted us to go out and make contact, and then as soon as we could make contact and keep them in contact till the Marines got there. And he was just going to flood that place and wipe them out. So we went in, and lo and behold, we made contact, but lo and behold, it was a regiment instead of a battalion. And we were only like 150 people. And meantime, they sent to reinforce us, a company out of Quezon. Well, they never ever got to us because we were too far from them to help us. And we were pretty well shot up, pretty well messed up. Had a lot of casualties, me included. But I was walking wounded. I refused to go back. And so for about 3 days, we were just completely surrounded. We couldn't move. You stuck your finger up, they'd shoot at it. And we were way outnumbered. By then, we were down to half what we went in with. So this company from Quezon was getting closer to us, and they kind of distracted them a little bit, so we decided just to bust out one way to break our way through and towards Quezon. And we did. And they chased us all the way back to Quezon. Got ahead of us sometimes, and ambushed us, but they didn't have time to set up a good ambush, so we got a few more casualties. We drug them out with us and got back to Quezon. And that was probably the worst one I was in.
Did you ever experience any fear, or since?
Not a moment. Not a moment. I'm a good Christian, and I believe that God was protecting me. And I never got a nick. I recall one day standing in Way. The North Vietnamese had hung a skeleton. They'd overrun a medical school. They'd hung a skeleton in a tree down on the bank of the Perfume River in a park. I was doing work that day trying to find out who was missing. The men there were two men with me. We saw that skeleton, and our first impulse was, what's that? Let's go down and explore that. We started down and didn't. If you're shot at, depending on how far from your head and ears that round comes, it makes a different noise. And on the way, working our way down to that skeleton, I heard the noise overhead, the hissing overhead. A machine gunner down there and we found out that was a trap. People had been killed by going down to explore that skeleton. And so I asked the two guys with me, did you hear that? And they said, yes. What was it? And I said, it's a machine gun firing over your head. There's a machine gunner sitting down there somewhere, lowering the elevation, one click at a time, until he brings it down and hits us. Let's depart. And so we got behind a stone wall and left. But I was never concerned that been shot at a lot of times, but never concerned about it.
One time we were out and they sent me with them. They had some students that were going into the recon business. So they gave me 4 students. So it was me, 4 students, and a Vietnamese. And it was kind of funny. We were on recon. All you carried was bullets and water. And very little, nothing else. All just bullets and water. And maybe a meal or two. And for some reason, you never had to go to the bathroom. You just only had to stay for 5 days, and I guess you couldn't get too buggered up. Anyway, this one guy had to go to the bathroom. I told him, okay, go back over there. So at night, we always slept in a circle back to back. So he went back behind the bush there. All of a sudden, had a firefight right there. And this guy had ran into him, and I taught these guys how to shoot quick and accurate. And thank God he did what I told him to do. The guy got off the first round, but he got off the first hit rounds. And he never got hit, but he got this guy from a squat.
Were you ever afraid that there was going to be something that stopped peace?
Yeah, a couple of times. I was in Germany when the Berlin Wall came down. So this was still during the Cold War period of time where you would have the Soviet Union and communist society, and then they basically controlled a lot of these Eastern European countries, whether it was Hungary or Romania or East Germany, and they were right up there on the East German border, and we were there on the West German border. So the idea was we were supposed to defend Western Europe in case the Soviet Union invaded. And throughout the 1940s, 50s, 60s, you'd have occasionally one of these countries would have some kind of revolt, or the people would rebel against communism. The Soviet Union would come in and tamp it down. They would just smash the revolt and they would reassert their control. So when I was there, we started having more of these kind of revolts. People wanted to get away from communism. They were protesting against their governments, and it was happening in East Germany too. And we were watching this in West Germany thinking, okay, well, there's no way the Soviet Union's going to let this happen. And if they let that in, and they're going to come in with their tanks, and they're going to smash this kind of protest movement, and that's going to create a lot of tension. And when you have a lot of tension, you got their tanks and our tanks really close together, something might happen. It's a very high tension kind of time period. And then all of a sudden the Berlin Wall opens up, and they let people out, and and we were just shocked. We just thought, well, there's no way they're gonna let that happen, and they let it happen.
I mean, where we were at, I operated as a spotter on our sniper team, and so we would provide overwatch for our platoon as they would go on patrol into a village, and they would conduct what's known as a KLE, or a key leaders engagement. So our lieutenant would go up and he'd talk to like the village elders, and he'd say, hey, what do you guys need in your village? Do you guys need water? Do you need food? Are your children getting education? And we would try to help them out in any way. But the majority of what I did is I sat up on the side of a mountain looking through a spotting scope for about 8 hours at a time. But we were we would get in firefights on almost daily basis, and there was, I think it was like the 91st grid line on the map there. Every time we crossed that, we were pretty much guaranteed a firefight, and we kind of knew that going out, but sometimes we'd go out there to pick a fight, sometimes we'd go out there to actually, conduct a KLE. We put 3 swing sets in our area of operation in Afghanistan, and they all lasted about 24 hours before the villagers took it down, because if the kids are on the swing set, they're not working in the field. So, wow. I mean, I would say that election times there in Afghanistan was probably our biggest non-stop firefight season, because they didn't want the Afghan people to vote. And so I remember the day before elections and the day of elections, we got, I think, like 12 firefights, 12 separate engagements over the course of those 2 days. So, we were in combat, over 150 plus engagements. We would get attacked at our base at night, and then we'd get attacked on the base about once every other week. And, my position, because I was on the sniper team, was up on the rooftop of our building, and we'd be able to see for, miles up there. But, our whole base was only about the size of maybe 2 football fields, so it wasn't very big. So everything was really kind of right there.
We were very lucky. I was assigned to 4th Brigade of the 82nd Airborne, and we were responsible to partner with the 205th Afghan Corps. So we all broke into small teams and embedded ourselves throughout their entire corps. And then our group worked with the generals and the colonels and the senior staff and the sergeant majors and those leaders. And so we would travel all over to check on the combat posts and to check on the other bases and to lead their battle plans. We had one major battle as we were pushing into Harmon province that we made sure that they knew how to plan and they worked with, and the Marines helped the Corps, which was the 207th Corps in Harmon, helped them do their mission, so we all worked together. We were very lucky. We had our sister units had many more firefights and casualties than we did because their mission was more direct fire, but we were very lucky. We had only, I personally only experienced one major combat attack, and it was the classic IEDs and small arms, and then we didn't lose anybody, so we were very blessed. So.
We got dropped off at the village of Gurfont one time, and it was like 30 kilometers away. Our helicopter came and picked us up. It was like 30 clicks out, and they dropped us off. And when we got to this village, they thought they hadn't seen American soldiers yet. Like, they didn't even know that Afghanistan was in war with it, like that the Taliban were fighting the Americans. And they thought we were Russians when we showed up, and it was kind of crazy. Like, the last time that they'd seen outside people were the Russians in the 70s. So when the helicopters were supposed to come pick us up, this sandstorm moved in. And so they said, well, we're not going to stay the night out here, so we're going to walk back. So like 30 kilometers, we're walking back in the middle of the night, and we're walking through the valley, and every dog in the valley is barking. We start picking up radio chatter that like the Taliban are looking for us, and they're shooting up flares on the other side of the valley. They don't know where we are. They just know that we're walking somewhere in the dark. I'll tell you, the best thing about being an American over there was having night vision. Like, being able to own the night kind of changes the game. But these guys are over here shooting up flares on the other side of the valley, looking for us, not even in the right direction. But we made it back to base that night, some 12, 13 hours later. It was a long walk, but and it was all just because of a sandstorm. So they couldn't fly because the sand over there is just like such a fine powder. It's almost like a moon dust that it would get sucked up in the engines of the helicopters, and it would just destroy them. So when air went red, it meant you were walking.
Walking through the airport there in Oakland, there was some protesters that were a lot belligerent, and I was walking uniform, and these protesters, there was mainly two of them that were speaking at us and calling us, traitors and baby killers and names. And I don't recall them actually spitting on us, but they spit out enough profanities and insults, and may as well have literally spit on us. But I got pretty irritated with them and swung my duffel bag at one of them, and one of the Marines grabbed me and said, I told me, it's not worth it. You've got a plane ticket, you're getting out of here. You don't need to go to jail for fighting with these idiots.
First time I returned home, we flew back on a big military cargo jet that had seats in it for 100 people, very comfortable. Second time we couldn't get out because it was the surge. We had hundreds of thousands of troops surging into country, and we were leaving. So half of our team got stuck in Kuwait, which is where we have a base. And they sat there for 2 weeks trying to fly out. The other half of our team decided to try an experiment. And so we found a cargo jet that was flying to Qatar, which has a Navy and Air Base. Got there, and then from there we found a C-5 giant jumbo cargo plane that was flying to Ramstein, Germany, so we flew to there. And then when we got to Germany at Ramstein Air Base, we got a hold of a liaison who was able to get us civilian airline flights to Denver, Colorado. So we packed all our gear in these special cases and locked our weapons away, and we flew on Lufthansa Airlines first class, which I have no idea how that happened, to Denver, and they weren't used to seeing soldiers with rifle cases. And we were setting off all the sensors because we'd been in a combat zone. So they specially escorted us through the Denver airport. We skipped customs, we did everything. We just went straight to the next plane, which flew us to Kansas City. And then in Kansas City, the Kansas National Guard guys knew we were coming back. They picked us up, took us to Fort Riley, and we demobilized. And it was pretty awesome coming back that time. Not the way you're supposed to do it, but everybody else was stuck in Kuwait for weeks on end because a volcano blew up in Iceland, which grounded planes for a while. And there were so many people at that base, there weren't enough planes to get in and out in a normal time frame. So, yeah, pretty good experience. So.
I was in the Army for about 3.5 years. I was a sergeant when I got out. And the military gives you a lot of leadership responsibility at a young age. And so I was a gunner on a howitzer crew. And gunners kind of run the day-to-day kind of operations of the crew. So it was a leadership position, maybe about 10 people. And I had responsibilities. I had to make sure that those guys were okay. And so it was a real job, real responsibilities. And I didn't think too much of it. But then when I got out of the Army, that was my whole life. I mean, those were my friends, it was my family, kind of, so to speak. And so I had responsibilities, I had a real job, and then I was getting out and going to college, and I didn't have any of that. And so that transition was kind of hard. All of a sudden, you're not responsible for anything. You're not look up to it in kind of a leadership role. You're just another student. So for me, it was harder than I thought it was going to be, transitioning back. But other parts were easier. When I got my first, I got a job in college. I was working at the college library, and the lady that was my boss was very excited and very, very happy with me because when she would put me on the first shift, I'd have to help open up the library and be there early in the morning, kind of thing. And most students didn't want to get up in the morning, and so she was very happy with me that I would do that. But for me, I thought, it's 8 o'clock in the morning. That's like sleeping in for me. Mm-hmm. So it was no big deal at all. So that part of it made transitioning easier because, being a student, having whatever part-time jobs I had, they were indoors. They seemed easier, not as hard as what I had before. Mm-hmm. So that made the transition a little bit easier.
So how long do you think it took you to adapt to the civilian life again?
Well, so far it's been 45, 46 years, and I'm still working on it.
What are some life lessons you learned from the military service?
Well, Drill Sergeant Fisher, he taught me 3 rules to live by pretty early in my military career, and these were rules that I've adapted to my life. But rule number 1 is always look cool. Rule number 2, never get lost. Rule number 3, if you get lost, revert back to rule number 1. And then Sergeant Michaelak, he gave me a piece of advice one day that sticks with me now. But I remember our first sergeant had just been chewing everybody out. I don't know what we'd done wrong, but I mean, he was just yelling at us, and he was mad at the whole company. I mean, just chewing us out, and he was just hot about something. Anyway, I went down to Sergeant Michaelak's room, and he said, "White, let me talk to you for a second." He sat me down, and he goes, no matter what you ever do in life, you're always going to get yelled at. There's always going to be somebody above you. There's always going to be somebody's always going to be your boss. It's just how you deal with it when they're done yelling. Usually you walk away and you be mad too, or do you walk away and just take it at what they just said to you? They just said it at a louder tone of voice. And I've really applied that to my life.
I think it's very important for all of us to have the idea that we work for a greater good. My life is important because I have the opportunity to influence others for the good of our whole society. I think it's very, very important that all of us understand that we need to spend our lives to make our communities better. It's a wonderful thing to say our nation is going to be better because of X, but the amount of influence that I can have over my nation is small. The amount of influence that I have here in Emporia is large.
Never lose the ability to learn something new. And intelligence are information seekers, and you have to seek to find. And probably my greatest lesson was don't ever lose the ability to inquire as to what is going on or what you're looking at. Seek information constantly. Requires a lot of study and a lot of observations, and I've profited from that all my life.
I think most people in the military do not want to go to war. They don't want to. There's always the occasional crazy guy, but most people don't want to. And I found it interesting over the last 10 or 15 years. First we start doing more with Afghanistan, and you send people into Iraq, and you listen to people talk about it, about, hey, we need to go in there, we need to go kick some butt, we need to go do, they're very aggressive about what they want to do. And my thought has always been, well, that's because you don't have to go. Maybe that's not your child that's going, or your brother or sister that's going. Especially in the early days, when I was just getting out of the Army. And actually, when I got out of the Army, I was in the National Guard for about 4 or 5 years. So during that kind of time period, I kept thinking, well, you're not going. You're pretty aggressive and excited about sending people overseas, but you're not going. My friends are going. My brother's going. Maybe it's not you or your kids. So I've always found that interesting. You have to be very careful, I think, about how aggressive you are about applying military force, because those are real people's lives, and it's a very dangerous situation. People get killed. It needs to be a last resort, and I don't know that everybody understands that. The military is hard even in peacetime. So you think these dangerous situations that people go to, you need to be very, very sensitive, and that should be a last resort. And that's always stuck with me, because it's not just a theoretical exercise. These are people I know. It could have been me. That kind of stuff. So I think people are too gung-ho and too excited to go use military force. So that's the part that stuck with me.
Get out there and serve. I mean, it's a lot of fun. You meet some amazing people out there. You get to see pretty cool places. You get to do pretty cool things and see a lot of things you wouldn't get to normally see as a civilian. So
I'm disappointed in how few people nowadays volunteer for the military. It's less than 1%. And I would encourage people to serve. And if they can't serve in the military for whatever reason, to serve somehow their communities. I think what the Boy Scouts teach is a fantastic example of how to serve, and I wish more people would do Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, military, Peace Corps, church volunteering, because that's what keeps our country functioning and one of the best in the world. C-O-U-N-T-R-Y. C-O-U-N-T-R-Y. For duty on our country, I'd give my life. For duty on our country, I'd give my life. C-130 rolling down the strip. C-130 rolling down the strip. Airborne Ranger on a one-way trip. Airborne Ranger on a one-way trip. Stand up, hook up, shuffle to the door. Stand up, hook up, shuffle to the door. Jump right out and count to 4. Jump right out and count to 4.